Have you ever felt like the way we connect as a society is kind of shifting?
Yeah, it's like we're playing by a whole new set of rules now.
Right. And that's actually what we're diving into today. We've been looking at a bunch of sources about how we communicate, how AI is changing things, even how society itself is being reshaped.
The big picture stuff.
Yeah, and from all sorts of angles, too. We've got Harvard Business School research, reports from the United Nations, even some philosophical essays. It's a real mix.
A good mix, though. It all kind of ties together.
It does. But, and this is important, this deep dive isn't about us giving you all the answers. We don't have those. It's more about, well, sparking your curiosity and giving you the tools to think critically about all this.
Exactly, because it's complex stuff, and it affects all of us.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, where should we start?
Well, you mentioned you've been trying to improve your own communication skills, right?
Yeah, always trying to level up.
Well, maybe that's a good place to start. After all, no matter how much technology changes, connecting with other people, like really connecting, is still essential.
For sure. And you know what's interesting? This Harvard research we looked at really highlighted how much nonverbal communication matters.
Oh, yeah. Body language, facial expressions, all that.
It's wild. Apparently, those nonverbal cues can actually be way more impactful than the words we use.
Like, way more. Some studies suggest it could be anywhere from 65% to 93% more impactful. It makes you think, right?
It does. So, wait, even if I'm saying all the right things, if my body language is sending a different message, people might not trust me.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about alignment. Your nonverbal cues need to match what you're saying. Otherwise, you risk sending mixed messages, and that can undermine the whole communication.
Okay, note to self, got to work on my poker face. But seriously, what other communication tips really stood out to you from the research?
Well, clarity and conciseness are key, for sure.
Right, less is more.
Right. Have you ever read an email that was just so long and rambling you were lost by the end?
Oh my God, all the time. And I'm definitely guilty of writing those sometimes too.
Well, it's the same with speaking. Being concise helps your listener, stay focused and understand your message more clearly.
Got it. Less is more. Got it. Anything else?
Oh, and they also emphasize preparation, especially before an important conversation, whether it's a job interview or a difficult conversation with a friend.
That makes sense, but how can you really prepare for every conversation? Sometimes things just come up out of the blue.
True, you can't plan for everything.
Yeah.
But even just taking a few minutes to think through, potential questions or disagreements can make a huge difference.
So like having a mental script ready to go.
Not exactly a script, but having a framework, anticipating some challenges.
Oh, okay, I see. This reminds me of something else the research talked about. Emotional intelligence. I used to think that was just like a buzzword. But they made a pretty strong case for why it's so crucial for communication.
Oh yeah, emotional intelligence is way more than just a buzzword. It's like the bedrock of good communication.
But how does it actually play out in real life? Like, what does it look like?
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever been talking to someone who was obviously upset, and instead of trying to understand their perspective, you just got defensive?
Yeah, definitely been there. And it never ends well.
Right. That's where emotional intelligence helps. It allows you to, regulate your own emotional responses, even when things get tough. You take a step back, listen to the other person, try to see where they're coming from.
So it's about me being able to control my emotions instead of letting them control me.
Exactly. And it's a skill, You can get better at it with practice. Think about strong leaders. They often excel at emotional intelligence because they've learned to, control their tone, listen actively, use positive body language, even under pressure.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to sum it up, emotional intelligence is about self-awareness, managing my own emotions, and being able to empathize with others.
Nailed it. And that skill will help you in all parts of your life, not just communication.
True enough. But speaking of communication, how do you think all this is changing, with the rise of digital platforms and the shift toward a more digital society?
Oh, man, that's where things get really interesting. That shift is reshaping how we communicate, how we connect with each other, even how we find meaning in our lives.
It's huge. It's like the whole landscape is changing, right?
Yeah.
For what, like generations, corporations were the dominant force in society, right? That's how people found jobs, built careers, even defined themselves. But now, digital platforms are becoming the new centers of power.
It's a total shift. And companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they're shaping our lives in ways we're only beginning to understand.
It's kind of mind-blowing. And with that shift, I guess we're left with some big questions too. Like, how do we find meaning and purpose in this new digital world? The old rules of the game don't really apply anymore.
Exactly. Platforms offer a different kind of social structure. It's more networked, less hierarchical. Instead of climbing the corporate ladder, you might be building a following online, creating content, or connecting with people around the world.
It's like a whole new world opening up. But it
Yeah.
can't all be good, right? There've got to be some downsides to this digital shift, too.
Oh, for sure. For all the amazing things about digital platforms, they're also incredibly powerful, often with very little regulation. And that can be a problem.
Okay, lay it on me. What kind of problems?
Well, just think about all the issues we hear about constantly. Privacy concerns, algorithms that can be biased, the spread of misinformation. These are real things we need to deal with as we move into this new world.
It's true. It feels like we're still figuring out the rules in this new digital space.
Exactly. It's a new frontier. And it's interesting to think about it in the context of history, too. Like, look back at the early 20th century when corporations were first gaining power.
What happened then?
A lot of anxiety, actually. People were worried about monopolies, worker exploitation, the concentration of power in the hands of just a few. Sound familiar?
Oh, it does. It's like history repeating itself in a new way.
Right. And it shows us we need to be mindful of how digital platforms gain power and influence. We need to have those tough conversations and figure out how to make sure this benefits everyone, not just a select few.
That's a really good point. So the big question is, are these digital platforms going to create a more fulfilling and equitable society, or are they just going to make the inequalities we already have even worse?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't know if there's a simple answer, but it's something we all need to think about as we navigate this new digital world.
Okay, so we've got communication, we've got digital platforms, and we've got a whole lot of big questions about the future. What else is in this rabbit hole we're diving into?
Well, there's one more topic we have to talk about, and it's a big one. Artificial intelligence. It's not just sci-fi anymore, It's already impacting our lives in big ways, and it's only going to become more important in the years to come.
AI. Huh. That one definitely gets my gears turning. Tell me more.
It really is changing everything. We're talking healthcare, finance, hiring practices, even the criminal justice system. AI is being used to make decisions that affect all of us, like right now.
It's kind of scary to think about, honestly. So
Yes.
this isn't just about, like, robots taking over our jobs anymore. It feels like it's more than that.
Way more. And yeah, there's huge potential for AI to make our lives better, but there are also some ethical things we need to be really careful about.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? Like, are we talking about robots becoming self-aware and turning on us?
Not quite, although the idea of AI exceeding human intelligence is definitely a topic for another day. But one of the biggest concerns right now is bias.
Bias, huh?
Yeah. AI systems are only as good as the data they're trained on. So if that data has biases built in, well, the AI is just going to perpetuate those biases, maybe even make them worse.
So it's like if you feed biased information into an AI, you're basically baking those biases into the system itself.
Exactly. Which means we could end up with AI systems that discriminate against certain groups of people, even if nobody meant for that to happen.
That's a pretty unsettling thought. So what can we do about it? Can we just, like, program AI, to be fair?
If only it were that easy. Bias can be really subtle, even unintentional. That's why it's so important to have humans involved to make sure AI is being used ethically. We can't just blindly trust algorithms to get it right.
So it's about humans and AI working together, not about one replacing the other.
Yeah, it's about using the strengths of both while being aware of the potential downsides. We need to be asking some hard questions about how this technology is being developed and used.
Like, what happens if an AI system makes a mistake? Who's responsible? And how do we make sure that everyone benefits from AI, not just a select few?
Exactly those kinds of questions. We have to think about the ethical side of AI now, before it's too late to change course.
It's pretty overwhelming, to be honest. But listening to you talk about how AI communicates makes me wonder, can a machine ever really understand the nuances of human communication? Things like empathy, tone of voice, emotional intelligence. Can AI ever grasp those things?
That's such a great question. I think it really gets at the heart of what makes us human. Because communication isn't just about sharing information, right? It's about connecting with someone else, understanding them, building relationships. It's about shared experiences, cultural nuances, all the subtle things we do that go beyond just the words themselves.
I get that. Like, so much of what we say is unspoken. It's about reading between the lines, picking up on those little cues, understanding the context.
Exactly. So can a machine ever truly replicate that? Can it understand what it feels like to be human, to experience joy, sadness, love, loss, all of that?
Those are some big questions. And honestly, I don't know the answers. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that.
It is. It makes you wonder if there's something about human communication that a machine can never truly grasp.
And if that's true, what does it mean for the future? For our relationships, our work, our society? Can AI really communicate with us in a meaningful way if it can't understand these fundamental human experiences? Or will it always be limited to a more, I don't know, superficial kind of interaction?
That's something we're going to have to keep exploring as we go. But maybe for now, let's shift gears a bit. We've been talking about communication and AI, but there's another critical skill that's super important in this age of information overload: critical thinking.
Yeah, critical thinking. We're bombarded with information from every direction, and it can be hard to know what's true, who to trust.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is about more than just taking in information. It's about actively engaging with it, questioning your assumptions, forming your own conclusions based on evidence and logic.
So it's like being an information detective, looking for clues and trying to figure out what's really going on.
Love that analogy. It's about being skeptical, but also open-minded. It's about asking questions like, where's this information coming from? What's the agenda behind it? What evidence supports the claims?
So it's about being more intentional about the information I consume, not just taking everything at face value.
You got it. It's about taking ownership of the information you let into your mind.
That makes sense. But honestly, sometimes it feels like this big abstract concept. How do I actually apply critical thinking in my everyday life? Can you give me some real-world examples?
Sure. Think about reading an article about a new scientific study. Instead of just accepting what it says, ask yourself, is the author an expert in this field? Was the study designed well? What evidence supports their claims?
Okay, so it's about looking beyond the headline and digging a little deeper.
Exactly. Or think about an opinion piece. Does the author use evidence from reliable sources? Or are they just expressing their opinions without any backing?
So I should be checking their sources, seeing if they actually hold up.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And you can use critical thinking for everyday decisions, too. Like, if you're buying a new phone, do you just go with the hype? Or do you read reviews from different sources, compare prices, think about what you really need?
So it's about being a smarter consumer, not just buying into whatever marketing tells me to.
Exactly. And it's the same with health decisions. Why should you trust a dietitian over, say, something you read on some random website?
Well, because the dietitian has actual credentials, right? They've studied this stuff.
Right. You're thinking critically about the source of information, considering their expertise and potential biases.
Wow, this is making me realize that critical thinking really is a life skill, not just something you do in school.
Couldn't agree more. It's about being an informed citizen, questioning things, making smart choices in all areas of your life.
It's so important, especially in a world that feels more and more complex every day. I'm really glad we're talking about this. This whole deep dive has been like an exercise in critical thinking itself.
Totally. And it's a skill that will keep serving you well as we navigate all this crazy stuff. Communication, technology, the future of society, all of it.
Speaking of the future, there's one more big topic we need to talk about. It feels like it's been looming over all these other conversations. Climate change.
You're right. It's the elephant in the room. While we're talking about all this other stuff, there's this massive global challenge that affects every single one of us.
And it's not just about, like, polar bears and melting ice caps.
No. Climate change is about people. It's about our health, our food, our homes, our jobs, even our safety.
The UN reports we read were pretty intense. They didn't sugarcoat anything.
Not at all. They made it very clear that climate change isn't some far-off threat. It's happening right now, and it's affecting us in ways we might not even realize.
Can you give me some examples? I mean, we hear about the big stuff like hurricanes and rising sea levels, but how is climate change affecting people on a more personal level?
Well, think about the extreme weather events we're seeing more and more of. Heat waves, droughts, wildfires.
Yeah, those seem to be getting worse all the time.
And they have a direct impact on our lives. They disrupt farming, which leads to food shortages and higher prices. They damage infrastructure, making it harder to get around and more expensive to live. They displace communities, forcing people to leave their homes.
Wow. It's like a domino effect,
Yeah.
One thing leads to another, and these events that seem far away end up hitting really close to home.
Exactly. And then there are the health impacts, which we don't always talk about. Extreme heat can be deadly, especially for vulnerable people.
And the air pollution from wildfires can make breathing problems so much worse. It's like climate change makes everything else worse, too.
Yeah, it acts like a threat multiplier. It takes existing problems and turns them up a notch.
It can feel pretty overwhelming, honestly. Like anything I do on my own won't even make a dent.
I understand that feeling. But it's important to remember that we're not powerless. There are things we can do, both individually and collectively, to make a difference.
Okay, give me some hope here. What can we do?
One of the biggest things is transitioning to renewable energy. Solar, wind, geothermal.
I know those are important, but can they really replace fossil fuels entirely? It seems like a huge shift.
It is a huge shift, definitely. It would require a complete overhaul of our energy systems and a global commitment to reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. But it's not impossible. Lots of countries are already making progress, and the cost of renewable energy keeps going down.
So there's hope there. What about the changes that are already happening? Is it too late to adapt to those?
Adaptation is essential too. It's about accepting that climate change is happening and figuring out how to live sustainably in this new world.
So things like building seawalls to protect coastal cities from rising sea levels.
Exactly. Or developing crops that can survive droughts. Or creating early warning systems for extreme weather so people can prepare.
It's about being proactive, minimizing the risks and impacts.
Exactly. And this isn't just about governments and big corporations taking action. Individuals can make a difference too.
Okay, so what can I, as just one person, actually do that will help?
We can all make choices that reduce our carbon footprint. Things like driving less, eating less meat, saving energy at home, supporting businesses that are trying to be more sustainable.
So it's about being mindful of my choices and how they affect the planet.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we're all part of this system and our actions have ripple effects.
You know, thinking about climate change alongside all this AI stuff really highlights how much we're at a turning point in history. We have incredible technology, but we're facing these huge challenges.
It's like we're standing at a crossroads.
And the decisions we make now will determine what the future looks like.
It's exciting and terrifying at the same time.
But I have to believe that we can build a future that's not only technologically advanced, but also sustainable and equitable. A future where AI is used to solve problems, not create new ones.
A future where we live in harmony with the planet, not against it.
That's a future worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And it's going to take all of us working together to get there.
So to everyone listening, we've given you a lot to think about today. Communication, digital society, AI, climate change. It's a lot.
But this is just the beginning of the conversation. We want you to keep digging, explore the topics that really resonated with you, and use what you've learned to make informed decisions in your own life.
Because the future isn't something that just happens to us.
We create it together.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time. It's amazing, isn't it? Like how all these things connect. Communication, digital platforms, AI, climate change. They all kind of point back to this idea of like responsibility. You know, being responsible with how we communicate, how we use technology, and how we tackle these big problems we're facing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not like these are separate issues. They're all woven together, and the way we respond to them has to be connected too.
Right. It's like we're at this make or break moment where we decide what kind of future we want, you know? And it's not just about cool gadgets and stuff. It's about building a future that's sustainable and fair, a future where people can actually thrive.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us back to critical thinking, which we were talking about before. It's more important than ever to be able to sift through all the noise, figure out what's true, and make smart choices based on, like, real evidence.
Especially now when we're just drowning in information all the time. It's so easy to just tune it all out or just believe whatever you see online without really thinking about it.
Exactly. Critical thinking is about being, like, an active participant in the information you consume. It's about asking questions, challenging assumptions, and coming to your own conclusions based on evidence.
Okay, so how can we actually get better at this?
Yeah.
You know, how can we become better critical thinkers in this crazy digital world? Do you have any tips?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is being aware of your own biases. We all have them, and they can really shape how we see the world, how we understand information.
That's interesting. But how do I even know what my biases are?
It starts with looking inward, being honest with yourself. Think about your values, your beliefs, your experiences. How do those things color your perspective? Once you're aware of your biases, then you can start to question them. Look for information that challenges your views.
Oh, that makes sense. It's so easy to get stuck in that echo chamber, you know, where you only see information that confirms what you already believe.
Exactly. That's confirmation bias. And it's why it's so important to seek out different perspectives, even ones that make you uncomfortable.
That sounds kind of scary, honestly. Like, isn't that just a recipe for arguments and internet trolls?
It doesn't have to be. The goal isn't to change your mind necessarily, but to expand your understanding of the issue, to consider other points of view.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like, even if you don't agree with someone, you can still learn from them.
Exactly. It's about being open to new ideas and having those hard conversations respectfully, even when it's challenging.
And it all comes back to communication too, right?
Yeah.
Being able to explain your thoughts clearly, really listen to what other people are saying, and find common ground even when you disagree.
Absolutely. Critical thinking and good communication go hand in hand. They're both essential skills for just being human in today's world.
So to bring it all together, it feels like we've come full circle. We started with communication, then we talked about digital platforms, AI, climate change, and now we're back to this idea of critical thinking as a way to navigate all of it.
It really is all connected, and at the end of the day, it's about responsibility. Our responsibility to be good communicators, to use technology wisely, and to make sure we're creating a future that's good for everyone, not just a few.
It's a lot to think about. But I have to admit, I'm feeling a bit more hopeful after talking with you today.
Me too. And I think that's a good place to leave it. It's not about feeling overwhelmed by all these challenges, but remembering that we have the power to make choices that shape the future.
And it starts with asking questions, thinking critically, and having those important conversations, even when they're tough.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.